So when we talk about AI, of course, there is a considerable amount of focus on productivity, on innovation, on efficiency, et cetera, even in this world of AI for good that we are all here together in. However, and this is something that Seyi, of course, will be speaking about, AI is not neutral. Online spaces are not neutral. They are governed, they are designed, they are sometimes left ungoverned in ways that are very much shaping how we feel safe to speak and participate and lead in these spaces. And AI is also accelerating, and these dynamics are shifting even more rapidly. So today we are very much here to ask the question, what does it mean to be safe online in the age of AI? And what role do we as change makers really play in shaping that? We're very, very excited to explore this question with Seyi Akiwowo, who is the founder of Glitch and a leading voice in digital safety, online abuse, and building more just digital spaces. She also uses this language of digital citizenship, and Seyi, I hope you share a little bit more on it. I will also be sharing it a few times now because I think it's such a good fit, and it's a great thing for all of us to be thinking about. So that's what we're doing. Before we dive in, we are going to get a quick temperature check of the room today. In order to do this, I would invite you to switch to gallery view. If you don't know how to find that, it should be in the top right side of your screen. It's a whole bunch of little boxes. Then you might be able to see all of us. There's a few of us with our cameras on and a few of us who don't. If you are feeling comfortable, we would love to have you switch your cameras on for this moment because we will be sharing reactions in the gallery view. If you go to your reaction button, you can send with effect as I am doing here. We can do a quick test just to see how many reactions there are. Deandra is doing it. Nick's got some skulls. Bela, Sylvia. Okay, amazing. It's a very simple check-in. Essentially, I will say a statement, and if you resonate, agree, have done that before, you can react with me. So I think we're ready to go. React if you have ever hesitated to post something online because of how people might respond. React if you have ever hesitated to post something online. Okay. Whew. A lot of us are thinking about that. All right. React if you have ever witnessed online harassment and you weren't super sure of how to intervene. Maybe a few of us, a few more. Okay, Zoom's giving us the big thumbs up. We've been in that position before as well, seen stuff happening, not sure what to do with it. React if you have ever reported harmful content online and also felt like nothing happened. Yeah, a couple of us, Saman, Mubarak, Nick, Seyi. Okay, also something that we have all experienced here in the room. What about this? React if your organization, your work has clear guidelines on digital safety or online conduct or even AI. Few more. Okay, awesome. See Deandra. I hope our CXC folks. Okay, a few less. So this is something that maybe a couple of us are navigating right now. How do we create those boundaries? How do we have that conversation? React if you've ever accepted platform terms and conditions without reading them. I have to react to that one too, because honestly, we've all been there. All right. Yes, I like the emoji reactions, Nick. Okay, so a collective experience that we've all just quickly pressed accept or accept essential cookies. We've got a few more to go. React if you've seen content online recently and you weren't sure if it was real or not. I've done that. Yes, okay. I see a number of people who have had this experience. Yeah. Tricky, something that we're all navigating and trying to figure out, not only as individuals, but also as organizations, news outlets, etc. We've got two more. React if you believe online spaces are safer than they were 5 years ago. So take ourselves back to 2021, just coming out of COVID. Interesting. Okay. Seyi with a hot take. Really interested to hear more about that. Okay, cool. And finally, a tricky one, react if keeping up with digital risks, online safety, AI conduct is starting to feel a little bit like another full-time job. I certainly have been feeling that. How do we do it? How do we frame it? How are we having these conversations? Where do I find information? How do I know what to trust? Okay, awesome. So generally, it sounds like the room, there is a lot. Thank you all for participating in it. I think we're all kind of collectively in this experience together and trying to figure out how to navigate a way forward as digital citizens. And I very much am excited to be able to have this conversation with you all here today. So on that note, I have already introduced her, but just to give one more shameless plug, very, very humbled to be sharing the screen with Seyi today. Seyi, you have been at the forefront of thinking about some of these questions for almost the better part of the last decade. You've recently published a book in 2023 about how to stay safe online. You run your organization Glitch, and you have also been consistently pushing for more just and ethical digital ecosystems where you are centering those who are often most affected by online harm, especially Black women and other marginalized communities. So we're very excited. I don't know if I've mentioned that, but we are very excited to have you with us today. Before I hand you the mic, a note to our audiences, please feel free during Seyi's presentation to drop questions into the chat. We will be collecting them and then able to bring these conversations back into the room once Seyi is done. So I will stop sharing my screen. I think we're going to have a little bit of a screen share swap out. And Seyi, I hand our virtual mic over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Esther, Nick, and Federica for inviting me to be part of your AI masterclass. I must say, I wish there were organizations and collectives thinking in this way, God, 8, 9 years ago when we were thrusted into the online space and fundraising efforts and successful grant making was kind of dependent on being online and being visible without kind of any of the capacity building. So real kudos to you for really understanding what it means to develop capacity building training for movement leaders. Just a few clarifying statements. I'm no longer the CEO of Glitch. I founded Glitch in 2018. I left the organization last January. So it's been a year of transition and figuring out how I want to continue being in this space without being so confined to the UK charity world. If you've got more questions on that, please put it in the chat. I don't want to derail while we're here, but I can definitely talk about the pros and cons of running a movement organization within the confines of a charity model. But as Esther said, and I really liked your check-in about AI not being anything new and not following the hype of hysteria, whether that is it's all bad or it's all good, but actually being quite grounded to say we've always grown up with technological innovation. It's part of humanity, whether it's the pyramids in Egypt, whether it's the Great Wall of China, whether it's the invention of the typewriter, whether it's your Walkman CD player. We have always grown up with technological innovation. And that has been great in addressing inequality, has been great for somatic work and connecting with our bodies and joy, been able to, easily create a playlist on Spotify rather than analog. And I still have a vinyl, but analog and having to change the vinyl record player, the vinyl record over so that you can continue to listen to music. We have seen tech make life easier for us, more enjoyable for us, more pleasurable for us. And we've also seen it leave people behind. And my work has been the last decade been trying to point out how this pattern keeps happening on a more systemic level, so we can have a systemic conversation about AI rather than where I feel we keep being on the kind of in the those in the movement, if you want to call yourself on the left, progressive movement, social justice. I feel like we're often playing whack-a-mole or reactive, or we're kind of responding to a rhythm that is being set by corporates and businesses, rather than having a systemic lens and saying, how is this good for society? So we can challenge all the stakeholders. So that's what I'm going to be talking about for the next 25 minutes or so, and then leaving rooms for questions. I really want to answer your questions, so please do pop them in the chat. So next slide, please. As I've said, in 2017, I was part of conversations around social media platforms. About harm, about abuse, about responsibility. I've sat on Twitter, which is now called X, trust and safety platform. I've sat on TikTok's trust and safety platform. I've worked with YouTube and Google. I have worked with them all to talk about their responsibility. I've also worked at the UN, or worked with the UN, to work with member states on regulation. We have been here before around what is harm, what is abuse, what's responsibility. And now 7 years later, we're back here again with some of the fundamental things that were not addressed around tech accountability, around transparency, and around minimizing abuse. It's the same issue, it's just a different technology. It's the same pattern, because AI isn't a new problem that's arrived without warning, which I think is important to note when we are thinking about navigating AI, whether that's directly with your work, or if it's influencing your work, or in other ways, that governments did know about the warnings of AI and tech and how it was exacerbating abuse, harm, harassment, and giving us even more work to do. I don't know, I'm based in the UK. I don't know, I'd love to know in the chat. We have something here called self-checkouts at the supermarket. Do you all have that in your countries? Please let me know in the chat. But it's a bugbear of mine, because you sum up the kind of energy after work to go to the supermarket, or you're taking time out on your weekend, right, to go to the supermarket. You've done all the shopping, you're checking all the ingredients, you're making sure you're trying to reduce your plastic, you're trying to pick more ethical options, you're overwhelmed by how many Colgate toothpaste there are. You navigate all of that, the shopping aisle, seeing people, crying babies, dogs, if your dogs are allowed in your country in supermarkets, and you finally get to the till and you don't get to speak to somebody. You are now having to do the work of cashiers. You are now having to put through items through a machine and do even more work. And that's what I feel about social media, that a significant amount of responsibility is being put on us as individuals, as digital citizens, to report, to block, to navigate responsibility that billionaires have abdicated. And so it isn't just sometimes about the direct abuse and harm, which I am going to be talking about. It's about how we've been allowing the extraction of labor on us as consumers, as well as those that are training the data sets, that are content moderating for us, who are flagging when content is violating platforms, who are escalating. We have people, particularly and sadly in the global south, where we're seeing a form of technological neo-colonization, where those who are not seen as full human beings, they're the ones that are cleaning up our messes, just like you have in the UK and in parts of the Western world, certain minoritized groups being the cleaners of cleaners of corporate companies, businesses, you name it. Now we have that on a global level, where certain countries are being given this as a profession, and they're having economies dependent on citizens seeing some of the most horrific forms of content online. And so the convergence I see as two very old ones. First is extraction, the logic that says some people's data, labor, and attention are resources to be harvested without consent, without credit, without care. We're seeing this with the way ChatGPT models are being used to scrape artists' content, authors' books without permission. And that logic doesn't start with Silicon Valley, which I often find quite frustrating with the conversations around AI and around tech, that there is an unwillingness for certain groups with more freedoms, with more privilege, to talk about how this is part of a longer history of extracting from minoritized groups. It's not something that started with Silicon Valley. And the second failure is, I believe, is a failure of care. And we often see that after times of significant and sustained levels of austerity cuts, of attacks on care, on welfare, on universal income, or benefits of some kind of social assistance, that when we see that has been chipped away, we also then see the rise of far-right ideology and extremism that then puts more of the care and labor on families and disproportionately on women. And that failure of care is in our systems. Technological, institutional, and political systems that were never actually designed to protect the people harmed by them. And social media is following a very worn path. And unfortunately, because technology can scale and can reach very widely quite quickly, it is highlighting and exacerbating problems that have actually been have been felt. Sorry, they're naturally exacerbating problems that governments have for so long failed to address. So this isn't theoretical for me. When I was in politics, I was elected as one of the youngest politicians at 23. I was the target of a coordinated online pylon. And that just wasn't about disagreeing with my opinions on refugees or migrants or colonization. It was something that was organized, dehumanizing, and designed to silence me. And tech companies hadn't at that time thought about that as a risk, but also did not design friction so that the worst of humanity now wasn't being displayed online. And now what we're seeing with the rise of the manosphere and incel cultures and other forms of extremism, people are able to monetize from such dehumanizing ideology. And so that experience that I went through in 2017, because of working offline and working in the communities around knife crime, youth violence, and domestic violence, I could see that the same patterns of violence were happening online, that the same vulnerabilities to radicalization and grooming was happening online. In the UK, we had a particular chronic problem, I'm going to call it, with Black boys being groomed through Snapchat into gangs and selling drugs through the party line. But because of racism and because of classism, those communities weren't seen as victims, and so there wasn't interventions. Had academics or political parties or governments or policymakers or tech companies picked that up as a significant problem, we could have designed social media and therefore AI so that it wasn't being used in the ways that we're now seeing with radicalization. So for me, this is not just about technology. AI is not just about technology. Online safety isn't just about safety and technology. It's about power and the systems behind them and who is accountable. Next slide, please. So what became clear to me is that this isn't just about bad people online. In my book, How to Stay Safe Online, I spent a lot of time talking about different stakeholders and different players, key players that can play a role in making sure our online spaces are safe, that our community feels safe, that our social contracts with each other is taking into account the impact of technology. Because what I felt was happening, and insert Spider-Man meme, is that tech companies were blaming parents were blaming governments were blaming children, and everyone was just passing on the blame to each other rather than looking at what was in their sphere of influence. And sadly, what we've seen now, and why I answered the question that Esther asked earlier about, do I think that platforms are safer 5 years on, in the UK, technically, yes, technically we have the Online Safety Act, and we have got some basis of regulation. And in France and in Australia, we have seen acts and legislation put in place to regulate. We also have that with some states in the US. But what we're actually seeing is that the regulation has come too late, and that's part of the problem. So we know this is not just a legislative issue. This is about a time, speed, and thinking more systemically about guardrails and about incentives. So as I said, this is about systems that reward outrage, systems that amplify systems that amplify conflict, and systems that profit from harm. And I think that one of the biggest mistakes that we are making right now, especially in the conversation about AI, is that we're focusing on the surface level. We're asking, how do we fix AI, instead of asking, what are the systems that produce this again and again? Because AI is not the root of the problem, it's an accelerator. It takes what already exists, the extraction, the dehumanization, the lack of care, and it scales it. And it's a design decision, because we could design engagement metrics to not be about outrage and shame and race baiting and scapegoating and envy. It could be about joy and reasoning and willingness and acceptance and love. It could be what is the best of us. We all feel better seeing cute puppy content online and cute baby content online, and maybe sometimes the occasional people tripping up on the on the public streets. But to consistently be seeing war content and abuse and harm and ridicule and shame is causing a cultural fear of being cancelled. And we are confusing accountability. We are confusing holding people accountable for their behavior with shaming, because the algorithms have rewarded people who've shamed institutions, and sometimes rightly so, to thinking that's the way in which we should treat each other. And so we are continuously in the loop of dehumanizing ourselves. So if the system is built on extraction, speed, and profit over people, the new technologies that we build within that system, including AI, so around algorithmic decision-making, recommendation systems, around AI content moderation. I remember working with a particular tech company who was wanting to use AI to moderate consent on the platform. So sexual videos and images, sexual images and videos, and wanting to regulate or wanting to content moderate around consent. And the way that they were training the AI systems were things like, if the woman screams, if the woman runs away, if the woman goes red. Well, that alienates quite a lot of people, because not everyone goes red and not is able to go red. Not every woman who is facing sexual assault or harassment will scream. Many people freeze, many people fawn because they're in a trauma state. It's there are other human responses. And we know that sexual harassment doesn't just happen to women. What about queer communities? What about non-gender fluid communities? So already training of the AI to moderate the platform is still behind in the way in which we live our lives. Next slide, please. And this is where it gets slightly uncomfortable. And I'm used to kind of being the person that doesn't pick sides, because I actually don't think that the way to address systemic issues is binary. I think we all need to understand that we've got a part to play, because it isn't just about the platforms. It's also about how we respond. And right now, quite a lot of our movements are stuck in reaction. We see something harmful, we respond, we amplify, and we burn out. And frankly, a lot of philanthropists are rewarding such movement leadership. We react to Grok AI early in the year, being able to nudify women and children, and we react. We derail our week, our days to do media responses, online posts, you name it. They apologize, nothing happens, or they apologize and they take down the tech for a bit, and then for us in the UK, Elon Musk is rewarded with a contract to provide electricity to the country. So, and then activists and movement leaders are on to the next issue. And so we're not actually changing systems, where we are reacting, in my opinion, to a Pied Piper taking us along their journey. And I think that creates a pattern. And I've called this playbook provocation, amplification, and withdrawal. Because if the more we're burnt out, the more we're tired, the more we're fatigued, and we're rightly so taking the time out to recuperate and to rest, the more of us that are withdrawing, and the more that these platforms are overdriven by hate and abuse. And so over time, the more people that are withdrawing from activism and online spaces, it means that we're not seeing alternative opinions, narratives, thoughts. We're not seeing the diversity that we once all loved. And I think that there is a fine balance. Before I think the waves of Me Too, Black Lives Matter, and the attacks on Roe v. Wade and LGBT rights and ICE, we were seeing that social media was an important tool to kind of amplify and hold people and institutions to account. But I think consecutively, particularly with then COVID overlapping all of that, there became an over-reliance in using social media for our forms of activism, and then being sucked into the way the algorithm works, which is outrage and shame, rather than edifying, thought leadership, being the light and pointing to a vision and direction. And so I don't think that this is something that can't be reversed. I think the more that we're aware of how these systems are working to cause division amongst us, so that now it's women versus children, and it's now Black versus white, and it's now transgender versus women. This is the algorithm shaping division so that we are on the left, or in movements or in social justice movements, we are more divided than ever. And then we're more exhausted. And then we know that the key to liberation and social change is for us to be working as a collective. So we need to be thinking about how can we be more strategic with our time. And one of the operating psychologies that I love using, I've been introduced to this when I was, it was 2020. It was 4 weeks before the pandemic. And it was from this guy called Professor Jonathan, who had been working in the mental health institution for about 50 years. Like, he had been there when they thought in mental health that shock therapy was going to cure people with neurodivergent symptoms. And he taught us this psychology called the drama triangle. And you can search more about this. I've seen more people are talking about this on social media, which is great. And it's called the drama triangle, where you will notice that often most dramas, most conflict, you can apply this in movies, TV shows, and social media. There will be somebody playing the role of victim, persecutor, and rescuer. And for social media to continue being the profit-making company that it is, and has been designed to be in the way it is, they will always want to try and have drama and have someone be a victim, persecutor, or rescuer. And the thing about the drama triangle is that even when we are right, we are still inside the system. We're still reacting to it. We're still feeling its attention. We're still in the drama triangle, rather than thinking about how we can hold multiple truths and people can have their opinions, rather than spending hours and trying to convince them, or that we're spending a lot of our time feeding these AI systems through our language and our attention and our habits that then get sold back to us through upselling certain subscriptions. We're still in tech companies' design drama triangle. Next slide, please. So what do we do instead? So the question becomes, if reacting isn't working, if the way in which the algorithms are inducing outrage and shame and inability to hold conflict and multiple truths, and our tolerance to difference is weakening and is eroding, and we have to be in these siloed and very extreme ideologies that life has to be one way. If reacting isn't working, what does a different approach look like? And for me, and the year and a half now that I've had stepping back from being on the front line of gender-based violence and helping to change the law in the UK with the Online Safety Act, taking a step back for me means that means all of us being able to take a step back and ask, how do we move from reactive survival to something more structured, something more intentional, and something more sustainable? And that's what's led me to do the work that I do now. Next slide, please. I think that this is about 3 layers. The first is systems, understanding where risk is actually coming from. Not why is this happening to me, not why a system produces this pattern, but because we understand the system. And that reduces self-blame, that reduces gaslighting, that reduces victim blaming, and increases our clarity. Therefore, we make informed decisions about how we engage with online. And then the second way that I see this, or the second layer that I see, is control. What's actually within our control? Not everything is in our control, but some things are. And so where do we want to spend our time more intentionally? And we also can have boundaries. So I'm in favor of muting people. I'm in favor of muting people. If I'm seeing, oh, okay, someone's kind of drifting off this way and saying X, Y, Z, this, that way, because they've also succumbed to the outrage and shaming machinery and the grooming machinery of social media, and I may not want to block them, I mute them. I preemptively mute people as well if I see that their behaviors do not align to my values, so that I'm not triggered and then forced to react and say something outside of my values. And that's where I talk a lot about digital self-care and digital security in my book, around password protections and around two-factor authentication, so that we're making ourselves safer online. And also thinking about, as Esther said, can we quickly check that we've seen the terms and conditions? Can we click accept essential cookies rather than accepting all? Can we slow down, because time's within our control, being present is within our control, and have a healthier relationship with social media? It may not mean that your behavior dramatically changes, but it may mean that you're more intentional about how you're engaging and what you are giving to the to AI and social media. Also, what's within your control is how you document. I was really pleased to hear Esther's question about if organizations have some protocol around online abuse and harassment. As movement leaders, in times that we are in right now, with the superseding exponential rise of the global far right, it's not going to be an accident or one-off that movement leaders in social justice are going to be surveillanced, are going to be attacked, are going to receive coordinated harassment and abuse. It is good governance for movement leaders to have a risk profile for their leaders and their staff, and even their board. Board members are also vulnerable to pylons and attacks. And being clear what would the organization do and not do, so that everyone's really clear what happens in moments of crisis. And the more that we can map out, okay, I'm launching this campaign, and I'm a NGO based in Berlin, I'm launching this campaign around climate change for COP 2020, or I want to launch some kind of report. You can work backwards around, okay, and how do I make sure that named staff on the report, that they have an option to either just go by their first name or initials, or they may want to change their social media handles. Like, you have a conversation as part of the building of a campaign launch, so that it isn't reactive of like, oh, we wanted our research, our report, our event to go viral, and then we're not surprised by that reach, meaning that some people who don't agree will see and may also then spark targeted harassment and abuse. And the last layer that I think is really important, and often something that is seen as a bit woo-woo and is a bit not essential, but I am pleased to see a trend in philanthropists paying and supporting and resourcing well-being of movement leaders. I would not have been able to achieve half of the things that I achieved and be here today, frankly, with sane mental health and hope, if it wasn't for the investment of philanthropists in my well-being. And meaning that I had time for my sabbatical, I had time to learn somatic practices, I had time to go to the gym and yoga and breath work, so that I could keep coming back to my body and being grounded and not become a robot, because I'm not. And that is what happens when we are being succumbed into the drama triangle of tech companies, and we're losing so many good people in our movements due to burnout, and social media is playing a huge part. Just today, more information has come out to say that social media is being designed to be addictive to young people, and that is shaping our brains, that's shaping our possibilities, our imagination, and the way we think systemically about change. Next slide, please. So if we zoom out, we're living through a moment of massive change. We've had a decade of austerity, as I talked about, a global pandemic, and rising inequality. And now we've got rapid technological acceleration. Historically, after moments like this, we rebuild systems. After the Second World War in the UK, in Europe, we built the welfare state. We recognized that people needed structural level support. But right now, with all of the change that we have faced over the last 6, 7 years, we're not having that conversation. We're still trying to fix individuals instead of redesigning systems. And that's where I think the conversation about AI could go, because technology is no longer optional. It is part of democracy now. It is part of information sharing. It is part of education. It shapes our labor, our relationships, our democracies. So the question is not about how do we stay safe with AI and social media. The question I think we should be asking is, what kinds of systems are we building to hold us? And so, next slide, please. What does this mean in practice? A few simple shifts, moving from stance to principles. So we're not pulled into every reaction. We're not pulled into every AI hype conversation. We're not feeling the fear mongering that media also capitalize on, which is why I think social media has been designed the way it is. Instead of announcing your position on every topic, focus on underlying values, not what you oppose on social media, or not what you pose on when you're writing a LinkedIn post, but what you support, what you believe in. Being a lighthouse to difference and the different ways in which that we can have an opinion on a topic. Next slide. Moving from visibility to safety, understanding that being seen is not the same as being protected. The activist instinct to be loud and present, which was also very much rewarded during Black Lives Matter, Me Too, and the pandemic, to be loud and be present, to show up and to be seen. But visibility without protection is just exposure. I strongly recommend that you think strategically about when you are being public, and does that serve your goals versus just making you more vulnerable? And you can ask yourself, what am I amplifying? What systems am I reinforcing? What capacity do I have to actually respond? Because the goal isn't to be perfect here. This is about a principle of being intentional. So every time you respond to a provocation, share outrage, or enter a fight, because the algorithms are designing us to be more divided and to be more moralistic and righteous, you're feeding something. So be sure to pause and ask, does engaging here actually advance my cause, or am I just generating heat that benefits the platform? Next slide. And I'll end here. Technology is often framed as something that is happening to us, but it isn't. We are shaping it every day through what we build, what we fund, what we amplify, and what we tolerate. So the question is not how do we fix AI, but what kind of society are we building through it? And what are we willing to take responsibility for within that? Next slide. Thank you so much for your time. And if you're interested in my Control Systems Heals program, please ask some more questions in the chat. Next slide. Over to you.
Amazing, Seyi. Thank you so much for such a powerful 20 minutes of our time, from leadership to thinking about how do we balance between these contradictions, thinking about the systems that we have already been contributing to and a part of, whether that's extraction or racism or patriarchy. So thank you so much for this conversation. As Seyi shared, pop stuff into the chat. And while you all are percolating on perhaps a few questions, I would love to maybe start. So much to unpack, but perhaps even just going back to this initial moment you shared that you had been a part of this coordinated pylon in 2017. And there's actually a number of folks here in the room who are in this position of change making. They've turned towards saying, hey, I've experienced something, I've seen something, I've been a part of something, and I want to be a part of that change. I would be curious on your personal experience, what helped you decide to fight that architecture, rather than just leave it completely? And I know that you've shared now in this later stage in your life, you've actually taken that step back, but thinking to that early moments, what were some of the sparks of inspiration or courage that you took with you?
Am I allowed to swear? I didn't ask before we did the prep.
I think so.
Go for it.
Thank you, Nick. What really pissed me off is I felt like I was going through class detention. I don't know if that's a type of behavior management in schools where you guys are from. I'd love to hear in the chat. But in the UK, if you had a class clown, if you had somebody misbehaving, you had somebody that didn't even do their homework, teachers will often give us class detention. I'm like, what did I do? I didn't do anything wrong. And I'm so glad I went to an all-girls school. I couldn't imagine how much more annoyed I'd be if I went to a mixed school and having to take accountability for a boy's bad behavior. But anyway, that's basically what I felt with social media platforms. Now, I had said something offline. The European Parliament had posted it on Facebook, to be fair, and then people shared it cross-platform on WhatsApp, on Instagram, on Twitter, on YouTube. And then these platforms that were benefiting from the engagement, because at first it was positive, right? I'm being booed by the far right, and I was dancing in their faces, like, you can boo me all you want, like, you know, people are enjoying someone resisting fascism, resisting the French National. And then it turned because somebody posted it on a neo-Nazi forum and then coordinated to send lots of horrific abuses. I do the right thing as a digital citizen, I report it, and they tell me no violation of the platform. That annoyed me more than the abuse, because I know I'm not an N-word. I know I'm not whatever they were calling me. I'm very much grounded in that. But I was very annoyed that the system that was meant to be there, that people were happy for me to use to talk about being the first Black woman this and the first Black councillor that, you were happy for my identity then. But when it came to that identity making me vulnerable to harm, I now had to absorb it. And that's why I started the campaign Fix the Glitch, because I was seeing these glitches, particularly as I just finished commissioning a scrutiny report when I was in politics, looking at how do we reduce DV. In East London, where I was representing, we had 6 homicides related to DV in 1 year. It was unprecedented. And so we took a whole year to understand what failed in our systems. So we as a council do that. We as a council do that after Grenfell. Politicians do this after, you know, state. I'm trying to use a global language here, but when the state the state has failed to uphold its duty of care, there are investigations, there are internal inquiries, and tech companies weren't expected to do the same thing. It didn't make any sense to me. It didn't seem to be good business practice. It didn't seem to be good safeguarding. It seemed to be so extractive. And so I was like, there are these glitches. And like I said, I just commissioned this report. We'd finished it about how do we address DV? How do we make it more, how do we use public education to be more culturally sensitive, because we're a very diverse community. So there was campaigns that were about addressing DV through beer mats, because we know that DV, domestic violence, increases during sports. But Muslim communities don't drink. So how are we going to educate them, right? So we're having these nuanced conversations. You know, I'm loving it. We're providing free phone numbers. And after we're not spending work convincing power holders that abuse is a thing. But when it came to the online space, I had MPs, politicians in the US, in the EU saying, "Oh, is it really abuse? Is it really violence?" I'm not going to spend another 10 years of my life doing the work that I know my elders have done to convince power holders that gender-based violence is real. I'm going to apply the same things that we have won offline, online. I'm not going to play that game. And I think that's why I was like, here's how we fix the glitches. And then in order to continue doing the work, because I was inundated with requests for training and for advocacy, I set up Glitch as a charity so that funders could fund the movement. But then the charity model ends up meaning that you are a sanitized version of yourself and of the truth that you want to say. And so it wasn't just tech companies that were making online abuse normal. The charity model was too. Philanthropy was too. I remember trying to fundraise for research, which is now out, looking at digital misogynoir. So looking at particularly how Black women experience online abuse, because it's not because I'm Black. It just so happens to be that I am Black, because I have the same approach to trans women, disabled women. But if we know that Black women are most disproportionately impacted by online abuse, 84% more likely than white women, why don't we look at their experiences and design policies for them, then we know that everyone is safe. We make sure that no one's left behind, which was a big policy by President Bill Clinton in the US, right? No one left behind because we focused on the most minoritized. I had funders saying, oh, you sure you just want to focus on Black women? You don't want to open that out to women of color? No, I don't. And so it didn't get funded for years and years and years and years. It took the death of a Black man for then funders to be like, oh, do you want to do that piece of? And so that's why I mean that I don't fall in for the trap of now absorbing all other institutions of their responsibility around extraction, racism, sexism. That means that tech think this is okay to do.
Thank you, Seyi. And I think this question of like, how are we designing for those who are absolutely the most affected is really important, and one that I'm sure many people in this room are thinking about. And thank you also for sharing this moment of saying, wait a second, there are glitches in the system. And I am not only going to say I'm fighting the architecture, but I'm also not going to allow myself to be swept up in the normality of it. Or that's not a word, but like,
I like the word though.
Thank you. Just making it all normal. And I will say there's a question I want to address.
Because on that, so if you don't mind, because on that bit, because what I think why movements are not being as successful is because we're not winning the narrative. We're always on the defense. In the UK at the moment, we're losing the argument on the Equalities Act. The Equalities Act is the biggest legislation that we have, that it means that employers particularly, but companies have to do equality impact assessments if you're from a protected characteristics. But what happened was we had right-wing movements attack what it means to be a woman, and we had the gender debate, and then this was the erosion where we're now seeing the attack of the Equalities Act. And I don't want to go down that political conversation. The reason why I bring it up here is because the narrative around that is, oh, but look at how many good things the Equalities Act has done. Look at like Windrush, look at this, look at that. I'm not going to name examples because it'll be too UK specific. But the point is, why are we defending the Equalities Act? Why are we not saying, here's 5 things we can do to reinforce it, how we can update it to be relevant for people? That's where I think that when we keep normalizing their narrative, that this is just too hard to do content moderation. No, it ain't, because when I post videos from my dance class and I'm dancing to Beyonce or Rihanna, they know how to say, oh, you're infringing copyright. They even know how to take off the sound off my video. So they know how to even edit the content. But you can't take down things that are clearly anti-Semitic, ableist, racist. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I think you actually touched on a question that came up in the chat around appealing to a supposed conscious motive in these organizations, whether that's saying, hey, we actually can't do this because we have a certain level of consciousness, or, well, we do it over here. Why aren't you paying attention to our CSR programming, or, you know, the ways that we are moderating content? And I want to actually then prompt this question around coalition building. And I know that this is something that you both, as someone who's sort of operated in this liminal space between contradictions, and you mentioned it a number of times in your talk, but also have been a part of coalition building. I mean, this, you know, what does solidarity across these movements look like, right? We aren't all just individuals. You repeat this phrasing of collective. And there's all of this stuff that's happening offline, whether that's racial justice or labor rights, et cetera. But then, of course, we have these digital rights as well. So would be curious if you can speak a little bit to where you've seen successes in solidarity across movements to meet this contradiction of big tech companies saying we're already moderating, or we can't actually moderate, but also where you're seeing people be the light and the vision that you've been speaking to.
The way that the Online Safety Act was able to get through was through building coalitions. I fell through the cracks of a lot of movements. I wasn't just the women's sector because I was a Black woman, and the women's sector in the UK predominantly serves white women. I remember when I started out with the Fix the Glitch campaign, I used the term online violence. I've received abuse from women's organizations saying, you can't use the term violence, that's not real violence. Now look where we're at. So I slipped through the cracks there. I wasn't really, you know, anti-men, so I wasn't part of the group there. I wasn't part of the digital rights group, particularly because I wasn't really into privacy and encryption the way that they were, or crypto. Like, that's hard maths that goes over my head, makes my eyes water, like it's not me. And then I didn't fit into the social justice movement, particularly because I believe that we should all be paid very well. So there's quite a lot of like, oh no, we're going to do this stuff for free, and I said we're going to burn out. So I didn't fit one camp, and that's been something that's been, I've accepted. I've done years of therapy to accept that I'm not somebody that falls into one camp, because I see nuance. And I think that my role as a visionary in the ecosystem is to see nuance, is to work ecosystemally, to work with people's strengths and be a bridge builder. It isn't to be in one camp. It's to see that multiple truths can exist. I know that my career, my experience at such a young age has meant that I see patterns across the world. I've worked in the Middle East and North Africa, training thousands of kids in soft skills to counter radicalization. So I can see the same soft skills that we're lacking here in the EU, which is so funny because the British Council funded a program to tackle radicalization elsewhere, but not in its own country. We don't have those soft skills. So I can't blame people for falling for ideological content. I see things differently. And so that requires a lot of patience. That requires a lot of dancing and somatic work and breathing. I left London. I moved to Wales to be by the beach. I've got a dog that keeps me grounded so that I don't get angry, and that I have enough compassion for myself and other people to help them find what they have in common. And so for about 6 years, I was working slowly to bring some of your most minoritized, marginalized, underfunded women's rights communities, refugee communities who are undocumented, who still need to have this legislation work for them, even though they can't report to the police because of the surveillance state. And that meant trying different ways in which to get them involved. They can't show up to a 2-hour meeting, lastminute.com. They can't show up to a prep meeting for the minister and then a meet with the minister and then a debrief. They can't. So it was about, how do I get funded for my role in being a bridge builder between digital rights and women and social justice of what we do have in common, and show that this is about building towards goals rather than a morality conversation that social media has designed. It's designed righteousness. It's designed who gets to speak the loudest and the more nuance, rather than humanity and health and hope and love. And the more that we can work with people who are different to us, because we should work ecosystemly. I don't have time to be a body worker for people. I can't hold that. But I love that I can bring body workers into the work that I do. And I can bring disruptors. I'm not going to be somebody that's going to say FUCK to the king. That's not going to be me. I will turn down an MBE, but I'm not going to use my platform to say FUCK to the king, because I want to be in certain rooms and power to influence. But I will work with a disruptor. At some point, I will bring them into the room, because it's about being visionary and having a goal. But it also means being okay with not being liked, because you're not flavor of the month. You're not somebody that is solely in their camp because you see nuance, because I embody nuance, because I'm a Black woman. I embody nuance already.
Thank you. Super powerful. And there's been lots of comments in the chat and emoji reactions. I think that there is a lot of folks in the room that are feeling really seen and heard by what you're saying. And I also hear, and correct me if I'm wrong, that Systems Control Heal has kind of met that experience for you, and you've potentially design something for other people that are in this nuanced position and thinking about, how do I bridge, but also where do I fit into this whole picture of bridging and operating? And there was a really good question in the chat that I think folks in the room would love to hear is, can you talk a little bit more about that, what that program is? How do people get involved, movement leaders, et cetera? What can folks know to kind of take with them in case this is really hitting the right spot for them and they want to know more?
Thank you for your question. I'm also doing practicing what I preach and calming down, because I get so activated about the way that we are being duped to believe that we're less powerful than we really are. There's power in our humanity to hold difference and to be with each other. And I just get so activated how hate is winning at the moment in time. So I'm just gonna So Control Systems Heal is a leadership program that you can do a one-dayer, because I know people are time poor. There's a 3-day program, or there's a 3-month program, or there's even a retreat as well. And it's about looking at systems and how tech intersect with other systems of money, of the criminal justice system, and philanthropy, you name it, to understand the systems that we're in and understand different ways we can think systemically. We often talk about systemic change, but actually there isn't the practice and the information of how to use different frameworks to think systemically. Like the drama triangle that I gave earlier, the more you can practice seeing that system, the more that you can kind of get yourself out of it. So systems is the first kind of key component. Then control is your digital self-care, your digital security, thinking about like you risk profile mapping, auditing your accounts, preparing kind of statements, having conversations with your board members if you need them to have to update their kind of governance policies to support you as movement leaders around what are you going to do to support me when I face online abuse and harassment. It's about updating your privacy settings. It's about anticipating, okay, and elections are coming up for us here in the UK, where the far right is going to be making some wins, sadly. What does it look like to anticipate that for organizations? So an organization I'm working with tomorrow is from a refugee and migrant community. And so I've designed this one day on systems control heal to help them anticipate what they will need to change on their social media profiles or platforms, and when the visibility comes, because when they do something bad, then the media want to like bring someone from the migrant community for an interview. So you want to take on the opportunity of visibility, but how do you make sure you're not exposing yourself and your organization to harm? And it also looks at the individual's family system. So it looks at the individuals, if they've got children, siblings, making sure that the individual, the movement leader, and their families are working together so that they're not making each other vulnerable. And then the last one is heal. So how do we practice somatic work? How do we practice exhaling? How do we practice noticing? Like I just did. I'm activated because I don't like the fact that hate is winning. How do I slow down? How do I reground myself so I'm not in my fear response and I'm in my full grounded capacity to think clearly about the matter? Because if I'm in fear, I'm being controlled. If I'm in fear, I'm more vulnerable to being in coercive dynamics through systems. So it's a loop of keep healing, keep practicing, being grounded, having the difficult conversations, whether that's conflict, discomfort, building collective practices in your organization, or if you work cross-sector or cross countries, to go back to systems control heal. So it's meant to be a reoccurring module to come back to, not just in heightened moments, but in something where it's like low stakes. So, I want to start a blog post. I want to start a Substack. Great. So what's your kind of content plan? And then how do we also risk map that? You may want to speak out on some things. You may want to say F-U-C-K to the king. So then let's know that is a red. And then how do we plan around that? Because, and I'll say this, I think there's been some really reckless movement leaders of late, because the system rewards outrage. So you've got people who are being rewarded by the system, by philanthropy, to speak out against Trump, to cuss Trump, to do this, do that. And then Christmas, when we all should be drinking, mulled wine and singing Christmas carols, everyone's frantic on LinkedIn trying to get change makers out of the US because Trump has said you've got 30 days to leave. I'm not excusing Trump, trust me, but I'm talking about what's within our wheels of responsibility. And now we're diverting important money and resources into emergency reaction before Christmas, when we should all be resting, because someone has been thinking that the way to make change is to keep attacking Trump and Musk. That hasn't proven to do anything.
And this cycle, I mean, we've talked about the acceleration, right? That feels like ages ago. I'm like, oh man, Christmas when? but it really was recent. And so things are moving super fast. And what I really like about this systems control heal idea and thinking about like a muscle to exercise and a cycle to keep returning to is that it also adapts for a change. And I think that that's something that we've been thinking a lot about in this AI for Good program, but it's moving so fast. And you start to think about things today, and by next week, there's new information, there's new challenges. And so how do we build that muscle that really is adaptable? And as you said, grounded not just in like the digital space and the response, but actually in this sort of like older knowledge that we have as humans in our body, et cetera, but also older knowledge of systems and the ways that they've been extracted, et cetera. So I think, this is really important, and we'll make sure, Shay, that anything that comes from this, that we send it along also for the audience to be aware of as well. I will bring us at least to my last question. And so if anybody's been sitting on one question that they definitely want to ask Shay, make sure to pop it into the chat. But I will share this with you, Shay. I think, we've talked a lot about the big stuff and where to go, but really like tomorrow, where do people start to stay engaged and get more informed? I'm hoping that your voice and your work is maybe new to folks in the room, and they continue to follow you. But do you have other ways, maybe one or two or three, that you would recommend the audience to continue to stay engaged, to stay informed on digital safety, on their rights, both on this like control stuff, so stuff that they can do themselves, but also on the systems practice and staying informed on how the world is changing?
Part of Control Systems Heal and the time that I took out was to really design for your neurodivergent, PTSD, on the verge of what the fuck is going on with the world type of people, right? And who are also time spent. That's who I've designed this for, because it's those that need this the most, because a lot of leadership programs, a lot of capacity building programs aren't like what you've developed here with Changemakers. Like it is for a particular type of leader already. It isn't for the ones that won't speak as polished and don't have family systems, right? Like don't come from family where they've learned how to regulate themselves. They haven't had a mum and dad around. They've had a mum and dad that's been working 2 jobs. They don't know how to come out of survival. And then now you're adding kind of visibility and death threats and you name it. So part of Control System Heal has a library that you can have access to, and it has a range of resources. And so to answer your question, find your way of learning. Like if it's podcasts, if it's extracts, essays. Like I know somebody who loves an essay. I know people who love poetry. Like find your way of your modality of absorbing information, and that be your way of consuming AI. Well, I guess becoming more confident about AI and what's happening, or social media or technology. Find your modality. You don't have to learn through the bullshit. I kept feeling guilty that I hadn't read the Financial Times this week. I don't know what's going on in Wired. I should know what's going on in Wired. They put me on the front cover. I haven't read in Wired. I'm just done with feeling like a bad activist or a bad change maker and feeling guilty. No, I like to be able to walk my dog. I like to be able to dance. So, hopefully one day someone makes a dancing podcast. So there's music alongside listening to current affairs. But that for me is what I would say to people. You're only going to do something if you love it, right? If I had time, I'd show you the scientific evidence of choosing love yields more energy than hate and shame and fear. If you choose love and you practice love and joy, and therefore you have that energy to something you want to learn, you're going to be more likely to do it and retain it, and it be something that actually helps you. Then I can tick it off my list of I'm a good activist because I've been able to read the Financial Times.
Thanks, Shay. And I know Mary has been sharing some really powerful stuff in the chat, as well as, there's also all of this distrust too, in like, where do we learn and who is saying what? And so finding your modality, but also maybe your people to kind of gut check and be like, hey, where are you finding information? How are you engaging with this? And kind of building that trusted circle as well. Speaking of trust, yes?
And I was going to say, being okay with the way I've got my friend Martha, maybe she'll see this recording one day, but my friend Martha is more radical than me, right? Like she's not on Spotify. She doesn't she's not used Amazon since 2020. Like she's more radical than me. I use GPT. I have my own custom GPT projects because I suffer from complex PTSD after a brain injury. So I need AI to help me do what I do, but I make an informed decision about that. And that's okay. Me and Martha still love each other. We are still comrades. We are still going to be at each other's birthday. She's the dog auntie to my dog Sade. Like, and that's okay. So we practice difference within our trust. Trust does not mean being the same. Trust means, okay, me and you are different. We can have a conversation about it. I will watch Dave Chappelle. I know not a lot of people don't like Dave Chappelle, and I will let Martha know I've watched Dave Chappelle. I don't invite you to watch him, but I know you love me enough for me to watch him. Does that make sense? It's practicing that within our trusted community too, because, and this is what I used to say early doors with social media, they co-opted the terms trust and safety in their guidelines, and they made us think that that's what trust and safety is, and it isn't. Me and you can have difference and still like each other. It does not mean that I now need to be like on a rage machine and calling you out and dragging you. Like, that's not what trust and safety means.
Thank you. And maybe I can inference that perhaps you have some skepticism around trust and safety teams in the corporate world. And yeah, I think you mentioned it already in what to do next. I think you said something around stance to principles. And, you know, I'm also sharing, at least from my experience, and I would expect with this friendship that you had, right? You have shared principles that you all can come together around, and how you operationalize those principles and where they show up in your life. They are going to be different, but that's also the beauty, I think, that we all feel in being this world together.
And it's beautiful to know that I'm loved for who I am, right? Then I know, okay, I've got green flags over here from my friend Martha. So you talking to me like that is full blown red flags. I'm not going to have it. Being able to know that someone's still kind to me with our difference teaches our bodies to pick up and discern when somebody's actually only liking us or wanting to be in community with us because we follow them. That is coercive control.
Absolutely. I will actually, I think, leave it on this note. But in honor of being collective, maybe Federica, I can have you unspotlight me and Seyi, and we could take a quick screenshot of those who are left with us and have been in this conversation. I know that, you know, there's a feeling of collectiveness here in this. So if you feel called to take off your or turn on your camera, make a big smile. Fede, can you actually do the the screenshot? Hey Mubarak. Okay, we have Letitia. Cool. And we can have a quick screenshot for Seyi to take with her. Yay. Yeah. Okay, and with that, we can stay in our gallery view. Seyi, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you for the power and the wisdom and the understanding and the clarity in which that you speak. I really learned a lot. I feel like there's so much to take with us. I think what I am really sitting with is this idea of systems shaping rather than systems fixing, right? We're not like here to kind of fix things and be reactive, but actually, as you said, be the light, be the beacon, be this light tower. And I hope that that's something that others can take with them as this change-making work gets exhausting and, you know, why am I here? Why am I doing this? Hopefully that is a sense of courage. For many of you, this is part of our wider AI for Good series. It is our second to last masterclass. So we've been here in this conversation about systems and healing and ourselves. In 2 weeks, we will be looking a little bit at how AI is being shaped in really interesting ways, whether that's deliberation or sign language. And I think a lot of the voices that will also be speaking in a couple of weeks will speak to this point that Seyi, you've been making about designing for those who are being left behind, and really thinking about how actually tech can be that amplification and can amplify what is good in us and in the world. So I think the links are in the chat to register. Thank you again, Seyi. If you feel called, for those of you in the room, please drop in the chat what's one thing you are taking with you today. I'm sure we would be really curious to know. Seyi, I'm sure you would be curious to know. And other than that, wishing you all beautiful rest of your Tuesday. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you all.
Ciao, ciao, ciao.